Namaste. Welcome to Indian Knowledge Systems Primer Course for Children. In the series of lecture on yoga, in today's session, we'll be looking at yoga and the mind. How do we define mind? We define mind as a part of a person which makes it possible for them to feel emotions, think, understand things. All these are seen as functions of the mind, that which the mind performs. So basically, mind is seen as faculty of consciousness and thought. It helps an individual to be aware of the world and their experiences. How do we define mind in the Indian tradition? In the Indian tradition, mind is seen as an inner instrument. It is seen and approached in a more robust way. So when you look at something as an instrument, the point of view of looking at something as an instrument makes it, open for calibration and configuration. For example, if you look at a mobile phone is an instrument. So one can calibrate it. You can change the way you want the display to be. You can change themes and other settings in it. So that's what an instrument is capable of. It is open for calibration. So the Indian tradition approaches the mind complex as an inner instrument, otherwise called as Antakarana. We will define Antakarana using the Tattva Bodha verse. Let's try to chant. Sankalpa Vikalpatmakam Manaha Nishchayatmika Buddhihi Aham Karta Aham Karaha Chintana Kartrut Chittam. So here if you see, Antakarana is divided into four aspects or four main dimensions. These are the Manas, Chitta, Buddhi and Ahamkara. Manas, according to Tattva Bodha, has the nature of indecision, meaning it is very indecisive in nature. It is either this or that. It has preferences, likings, and it has too many complex factors to deal with. There is a lot of emotion that comes and goes in the Manas. Buddhi, if you take up, the Buddhi factor is more to do with the nature of decision. It is very decisive. It has the quality of Viveka. Ahamkara, on the other hand, is that of the doership principle, wherein one feels that they are the Karta, that they take up things and they action it and then they execute and get it to a closure. Chittam, on the other hand, has the nature of thinking, recollection, processing, reflection. All this happens in the Chitta. So, if you further look at Antakarana a little more deeply, like I explained earlier, Anta means inner and Karana means the instrument or organ. So here Antakarana means the inner instrument which is open for calibration and tweaking. In the Indian knowledge systems, thus Antakarana is seen as the totality of the mind. If you look at the Manas again, the mind, the Manas, is where the perception of feelings and emotions happen. Whereas the Chitta holds the memory. The memory aspect of the mind is being held in the Chitta. So that is the thinking faculty. It is the storehouse of all our experiences. Let's say if we look at rice kheer and we fondly recall the experience of our mother making it every time during our birthday. This is a simple recollection that happens. So this pattern happens in the Chitta. The Buddhi is the discriminating faculty, which means it will clearly dictate one person to either do or not do certain things. It will discriminate the good from the bad, the right from the wrong. Such a discrimination happens in the Buddhi, which is otherwise called as Vivekasthana. Ahamkara is otherwise ego or the doership principle. The sense of I-ness when you wield an action, that's called Ahamkara. So the Antakarana here, if you look from the Indian tradition, refers to the entire psychological process. So all this said and done, how does one quiet the mind? Usually, if we sit idle, we think about a lot of things. We dream and fantasize about a lot of things. We think about things that we miss. We think about things that we look forward to. All this keeps happening in the mind or the mind complex. So, these thought patterns are called as vrittis. When such vrittis cease to exist in the mind field, that's when the mind becomes calm and quiet. It becomes still. So cessation of vrittis leads to quietening of the mind. Vrittis are nothing but the thought activity or the various mental patterns that arise in the mind complex. If you look at the classical text of Yoga Sutra by Patanjali Maharishi, he classifies vrittis into 5 main types. Number 1, pramana. Number 2, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smriti. These are the 5 types of vritti. These 5 types of vrittis, we will delve into it a little deeper. If you look at pramana, pramana is nothing but valid knowledge, which is appropriate knowledge. There are 3 types of pramana also. One is pratyaksha, anumana and agama. Pratyaksha is direct perception. If you look at a child, when you tell them, when you keep telling a toddler that don't touch the fire, it will be hot, it will be hot. It takes some time for them to sort of gain that conviction in our words. But by, mistake, they end up touching something hot. They will immediately understand. So going forward, it will be in their direct perception as to not go near or touch the fire. They will understand it as something that should not be done. That's called direct perception. That's pratyaksha anubhava. Second, anumana. Anumana is inferential cognition. That means we look and perceive something, thereby we make an inference on the root cause of the perception. That's called anumana. Agama, on the other hand, is codified rishi vakyas or anubhavas. These come from deep anubhava of strong seers. These are otherwise also called as shabda pramana. For example, that's why slowly, if you take a very simple example, if you look at kids, they'll slowly start gaining conviction in the words that the parents say. They will start understanding that whatever the parents say, it is in the best of their interest that it is being told. That's when their parental vakyas become shabda pramana. This is a simple example. So, the second vritti, we looked at the different types of pramana vritti, which is the first one. The second vritti is viparyaya. Viparyaya means misconception or wrong knowledge. Looking at something and perceiving it completely wrongly is viparyaya. Third is vikalpa, which is imagination, the grand imagination that the mind always does. Fourth is nidra or deep sleep, or where the cognition of nothing happens. When you sleep, when you are in deep sleep, you cognize nothing. That's what you cognize. Smriti, which is the fifth and the final vritti, it's called as memory, or the impressions created out of varied experiences is called smriti. Let's also look at definition of all these vrittis based on the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Vrittayah panchatayah klishta klishtaha. In this verse, Patanjali Maharishi explains that there are 5 kinds of vrittis, or thought waves, which are either painful, klishta, or not so very painful, klishta. Pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smritayah. So the vrittis are the right knowledge. What are all the vrittis? Pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smriti. Pramana is right knowledge. Viparyaya is misconception. Vikalpa is imagination. Nidra is sleep. And smriti is memory. Pratyakshanumanagamav pramanani. Where we explain what is pramana. Pramana is where pratyaksha, anumana and agama happens. Direct perception, pratyaksha. Inferential cognition, anumana. verbal testimonial or Shabda Pramana, that is called Agama, happens. These are considered as valid sources of knowledge or Pramanas. Okay. Next. Viparyayo mitya jnanamatadrupa pratishtam. Viparyaya or misconception or wrong knowledge about something is when you have very little knowledge about some vastu and you think that is what it is. This is what leads to misconception. Viparyaya. What is vikalpa? Shabda jnananupati vastu shunyo vikalpaha. Vikalpa is imagination of something where the reality itself does not exist. For example, we just think, usually we have a very famous idiom, building sand castles in thin air. You can't build them, but you still think of such things. That's vikalpa shakti. Abhava pratyaya lambana vrittir nidra. Cut. Abhava pratyaya lambana vrittir nidra. So, cognizing the nothingness, the abhava of nothingness happens during the sleep. That's what is called as nidra. Anubhuta vishaya sampramosha smritihi. Not allowing experiences to escape, but they are retained in the memory. That sort of a state is called as, that sort of a factor is called as smriti. This is a certain type of vritti as well. Now this is a very colorful infographic of easily recalling what are all the panchavrittis. The first vritti, like we spoke of, is pramana, right knowledge, which is inclusive of pratyaksha, where direct perception happens, anumana, where inferential cognition happens. Example being, when you look at smoke, you will definitely know that there should have been a fire, right? Smoke will not come without the source of fire. So that's anumana. Third pramana is agama or testimony. The second vritti is that of viparyaya or wrong knowledge. Mistaking a rope for a snake is called as viparyaya, is an example of viparyaya. Vikalpa is total imagination. If you look at the iconography here, your mind will just go on and on about multiple things. Full imagination blossoms. That's called vikalpa. The verbal expression for which there is no object in reality. That's what is called as vikalpa. Nidra is sleep, a state of emptiness or absence of all other vrittis is called as nidra. Smritihi is memory. So for example, when I utter the word apple, we will automatically think of a vastu being red in color. It is of being a certain shape. Sometimes we will recall how it tasted. Sometimes we will recall certain experiences of having apple with, with our mothers and parents and all that. So this recollection of experienced objects without adding details from other sources, pure recall from the memory is called as smriti. So what are all vrittis and kleshas? We will try to understand what is a klesha. Excuse me. So we already saw, for somebody to be in a state of yoga, for somebody to have a quiet mind, the vrittis should have stopped to exist. The cessation of the vrittis should happen. But usually that happens through either subsidence or resolution. You will go to a deeper resolved state where the vritti itself the structure of the vritti itself will dissolve. But the life experiences influence the mind. General life experiences that we have, they constantly give input and influence the mind all the time, thereby creating impurities called as kleshas. These kleshas are different vritti. They impact all the panchavrittis in multiple ways. So cleansing of these kleshas become a very, very important process. That's when you will be able to attain to the state of yoga. How will you attain to the state of yoga? By calming your mind. How will you calm your mind, quieten your mind? By resolving all the vrittis. So there are 5 types of kleshas. Avidya, Ashmita. So there are 5 types of kleshas. Avidya, Asmita, Raga, Dvesha, Abhinivesha. Avidya is fundamental ignorance. Basic ignorance, primary ignorance is called as avidya. Asmita is I-ness or I am the doer. The sense of us being the doer somewhere is called as asmita. Raga is likes. Dvesha means dislikes. Abhinivesha is fear of death. It can also be understood as fear of losing a sense of identity. We used to be the favorite, sometimes it happens in student life. Once we used to be the favorite student for some teacher. Teachers never show, preferences or partiality, but just because we would want to hold on to the identity of us being favorite to some teacher, we would do all that is in our might, to be in that space where we feel settled that way. Then some new, student comes into the class, then we will feel that, there is a general competition, mild, harmless competition that will emerge automatically. This, if you sit and reflect and see, it's a sense of losing of that identity of being the favorite student in the class to the teacher would drive this effort. That's called as abhinivesha. So, attaining to a quiet mind. How does one attain to a quiet mind? We will see a simple process as per Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So, the yogic state of samadhi is attained by stilling all the vrittis, cessating all the vrittis, leads to samadhi. What are all the vrittis we saw? Pramana, Viparyaya, Vikalpa, Nidra, Smritihi. So, all these panchavrittis needs to be calmed down, which can happen still. The stillness can come only by calming the mind. But how does one calm the mind? Either through resolution or subsidence of the vrittis. But how does that happen? One has to deal with the impurities that keep influencing these panchavrittis. The impurities are otherwise called as kleshas. So these kleshas should be removed. What are all the kleshas? Asmita, avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. These are the pancha kleshas that influence the vrittis constantly. So those kleshas can be removed by sadhana or constant practice of removing such impurities, let's say through kriya yoga or ashtanga yoga and all of this. There are also simple yogic practices such as pranayama, kapalabhati and other things which directly helps to attain chitta shuddhi and other forms of shuddhi. Thereby these vrittis will be removed gently. Now, all this while we were trying to understand the Indian psychological process of dealing with the mind complex. Now, let's also understand how modern cognitive psychology deals with this same concept. All the sensorial information, the processing of all the sensorial information and the interpretation through the brain, that's what is called as perception. For example, what are all the five senses we have? Sight, smell, taste, touch and hearing. So these sensorial information, constant communication, information exchange happens with the outside world and the inside world through the sense organs, right? So this, when it goes inside, the brain processes these sensory inputs and it interprets in a certain way. That's called as perception. These recorded experiences are stored in the long-term memory. It's stored in a structure called as long-term memory according to modern cognitive psychology. The central executive, there is a system in the brain called as the part of the brain called as the central executive system, which is responsible for higher order intellectual functions such as decision making, sorting, division of labor. All that is being done in the central executive, otherwise called as a higher order thinking part. The mind functions are the general mind functions are mapped to specific brain regions such as the amygdala. Amygdala, if you see here, that small bulb-like nodule which is present in the right side of the infographic that we are showing on the screen is called as amygdala. Amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. All the emotions and other processing happens in this part of the brain. All your fear and pleasure, all of that comes only from the amygdala. The hippocampus is where the consolidation of all the memories happen, which is very close by to amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is this part of the brain is where the central executive for higher order cognitive functions happen. This is what leads to self-regulation, emotional balancing and control. All that happens in the prefrontal cortex. So these are the main parts of the brain which are directly associated to cognition or the mind and the psychological process. Now, let's talk about conditioning, because there are several parallels that exist between the framework of yogic psychology and modern cognitive psychology, right? So, one aspect of understanding it is through the concept of conditioning. Conditioning can be understood as likes and dislikes. We have repeated patterns of liking something and not liking something. So, this is otherwise called as, in modern cognitive psychology terms, it's otherwise called as associative learning. We constantly, there is a new input that comes in, we constantly try to map it with our existing memory, existing experience and form a perception about it. For example, if once we have tried a new dish or something somewhere and we didn't like we didn't like the preparation on that particular day, sometimes we end up not liking the dish at all. We will not even give it a second try. That's a strong like or a dislike that we develop for the dish. So such things also happen. So the raga and dvesha and brain development, we will try to understand it now. Strong attraction towards objects or people, like attraction for trendy gadgets, foods and fashionable clothes, these are called as raga. We already saw this form one of the pancha kleshas also. Dvesha is a strong repulsion towards certain things. Usually raga happens through pleasure. Usually when a sense of pleasure is invoked in the brain region, it leads to raga. The conditioning of likingness happens through the invoking or the inducing of pleasure signals here in the brain. Similarly, dvesha happens through fear or repulsion to certain things. Dvesha is dislikeness. So the modern connection, if we see, appetitive conditioning, this is what is called as appetitive conditioning, where pleasure-based stimuli is constantly being generated in the brain region. Liking a favorite food, liking a certain type of environment and all that, a weather, all this is called as appetitive conditioning. And aversive conditioning are responses to fear. Fear structure happens. That's called as aversive conditioning. The role of the amygdala, if you see here, it controls the fear and pleasure responses. We already saw all our emotions are processed in the amygdala. It's called the emotional center of the brain. So repeated stimulation in any direction, be it pleasure or fear, will lead to addiction. Especially in adolescence, if you see, repeated seeking for pleasure will lead to addiction. So when we talk about yoga and mental health, it is said that at least 15% of the lifetime prevalence of any anxiety disorder. There is so much anxiety disorder which is very prevalent in the lifetime. So depression can lead to depression. Automatically one can feel depressed also. One of the major anxiety disorder is the cause for depression also. So it can result in major health deterioration as well. Currently, there are immense literature or research surveys that exist that sort of reinstates the evidence that yoga is seen as a monotherapy for depression and anxiety disorders specifically. Raga and dvesha especially hinder the mental calmness and true happiness. It definitely hinders it, right? And these are impediments to the state of yoga. How so? When you strongly like something, you would want it again and again and again. Thereby you will not be open for other experiences also. Or if you dislike something, you will not be able to develop a connection towards it. That will get reinforced in your brain. It forms this klesha gets reinforced and it will automatically reinforce the vritti as well, thereby not allowing the mind to become calm and thereby not achieving a certain stillness of mind or called as state of yoga. It will not let you go there. So raga and dvesha definitely hinders the cessation of vrittis. So there are certain yogic tools we already saw. Chitta Shuddhi ke liye we saw that there is pranayama, appropriate ahara niyama, all this helps in Chitta Shuddhi. Similarly, it provides for a certain freedom and unfettered mind. So in adolescent age, if one is able to develop appropriate aspirations and goals, because when you have appropriate aspirations and goals, you will usually work towards it. Thereby you are reinforcing positive things in your mind, which will keep you motivated, keep you enthusiastic, keep you filled with energy. Automatically you will become disciplined, and your mind will not be randomly idle. All this, thereby ensuring your mental health as well. So how does this analysis, having the framework analysis, raga, dvesha, vritti and klesha, how does it help in deconditioning? It helps in detoxification and long-term management. How so? Because once you attain to a certain discipline so that you can work towards your goal and all that, automatically, like I mentioned earlier, you will develop ahara niyama, wherein you will not be randomly, for example, indulging in some food pattern, let's say having ice cream the previous day of the exam, where you are very sure to fall sick. You would not do that, because you will be focused, all your efforts and energy will be focused on faring well in the exam. This is a simple example of how you decondition your otherwise raga dvesha vrittis. Thereby you will also increase self-control, and you will quit habitual patterns, looking at mobile phones and other gadgets, involving in gaming and other things. You will be very responsible, and you will self-regulate yourself. There are also, research groups also show decreased cravings when you perform yoga, because even physiologically they lead to a lot of stabilization hormonally. Your dietary requirements, your jataragni or your digestifier, all that will become stabilized because of yogic practices. Hatha yoga and physical practices, physical exercise, that is how they reduce the craving also. Similarly, from a very psychological aspect, they will enhance your mood and thus your quality of life as well. If you look at a specific disorder called the post-traumatic stress disorder, yoga is very, very beneficial and effective for handling PTSD. So pranayama reduces anxiety and panic levels. Panic levels. When you panic too much, if you actually take deep breaths, you will see that you will automatically calm down. That's why pranayama is helping along those lines, seem to help along those lines. This is how yoga and certain yogic tools helps us to decondition. So in this session we saw how from the Indian tradition we deal with the whole mind complex, and how the frameworks given in the Indian tradition, such as that of the pancha kleshas, the antakarana, the panchavrittis, all these are robust frameworks that helps make us understand the whole psychological process very holistically, and it provides for tools to maneuver, to attain to good mental health, attain to good physical health, setting appropriate aspirations, not going astray through distraction and all that. That's how the yoga and the mind go hand in hand, and it helps one understand one's own mind very easily, in a much better way. Okay. Thank you.